Hello, friends. It's pretending to be 10 o'clock in Redmond, and it's a Tuesday, so it's time for API review, and it's in English because traffic has beaten all the languages out of me today. Something about kekalos, ena, and more Greek words. All right, cool. First up, if things load, expose a new configuration API to help in null value binding 116700. Tarek.
Yes. Okay. So we have a long-standing issue. I mean, like it's there for like a few years, and users uh, most of the time complaining about this issue specifically. And the issue is in our configuration today, we are not differentiating between null values and non-existing values. So when we see any configuration value null, we assume that this is not existing in our binder, and we'll just like treat it as not existing. So we are not forcing null values to the while binding. I mean, so we don't bind to null values in general. And this is causing some problems for people that expecting to see the null value get set in while binding to the configuration. And also we have some configuration providers like JSON configuration provider. When reading the configuration and seeing null value, it converted to empty space, empty string, I mean, instead of null. And this empty string will get binded to the value instead of null, which is causing confusing for users about like I set null, why I'm getting like empty space instead. And there were a lot of discussions. I mean, like how to work around it and this stuff, but it's really messy. I mean, like everyone not satisfied with our current behavior. So the the proposal here is so today. I mean, like our interface for configuration doesn't have anything to tell about like if the configuration entity is exist or not when we getting null. So the proposal here is we adding a extra API here, which is we call it try get value inside the configuration section class, which is can tell about like it can get the value from the configuration and in same time return boolean telling like if this is really exist or not. And this API is going to be used by the configuration binder. I mean, so to check to understand if we have a null value or we have non-existing value, and it treated as this, and this should fix the issue and make the behavior more understandable and logical. I mean, uh, one note to mention here today, the configuration binder depends on the configuration section interface. And the issue is like uh, our configuration libraries still support .NET Framework, I mean NetFX and Net Standard 2. So we cannot expand this configuration section interface itself. So the options we have here is either to add this API to the configuration section class itself, or to introduce a new interface or a new abstract class to add this and make this configuration section class to implement the new interface. So discussing it with some people around, I mean, like it looks like we prefer to add it to the configuration section instead of like introducing a new interface or a new abstract class. Yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, Stefan. So one concern I have about this approach is you, you can bind to more than just a configuration section, right? You can bind to any I configuration, which if we were going to do it on the concrete types, we would need to have this on configuration section and configuration root, I believe.
Uh,
Uh,
Sorry. So our configuration binder today depends on iConfiguration section.
Oh, I
So
see.
yeah.
So you
So
can't bind to the root of the configuration?
yeah, I mean,
Oh, interesting.
usually root doesn't have values. So
Usually not. Yeah,
yeah.
okay. I didn't
So
realize that our binding logic was specific to iConfiguration section.
yeah, if you
I
look at the
still
code,
like
yeah.
the idea of a new interface potentially. Though I see your point that like not many too not too many people implement it.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah.
Tyler, can I ask a question? You mentioned that with this change, you're going to change the behavior of the configuration binder so that if now something is null, it will be explicitly set to the corresponding property on the type.
Yeah, if we got a null configuration after this change
Isn't
in the
that
binder itself, I mean, like, when we read the configuration, I mean, through this configuration section, and if we got a null value, so we explicitly will set this null value to the binding it to the whatever property inside the object.
isn't that technically a breaking change?
Yeah, it's a breaking change. We are going to document this as a breaking change. Yes.
Do we have a feature switch?
Sorry, can you say it again? I'm not hearing
It's
you.
configurable either via API or via feature switch. And
Yeah, I mean, like, actually, I have a draft PR there, and it's including the config switch. But discussing it, I mean, even offline with Ericsson, Jones, and yeah, I mean, we prefer about like we think like this is a breaking change, but it's not be a bad breaking change, and the workaround for it should be easier for people. I mean, like for somebody today, I mean, like using JSON provider and you putting null, so they are getting empty space. So the workaround for them is just like they can change the configuration and put empty space instead of null. So what I'm trying to say is like the workaround is easy. And also, I mean, like we are going to document this, so we prefer not to start with the switch, but we have the option in the future. I mean, like if we see like big demand about people need the old behavior, which is I doubt, so we can add the switch later.
I don't think this is one that would be good for feature switch because people are going to start using it and expecting one behavior, and then we're going to make the break and they're going to start using it and expecting a different behavior. And if you have the switch, then two libraries might not be compatible with each other at that point. I think it's the kind of thing, because of the type of break it is, you'd either have to make it a per instance switch or something similar. That way you don't have
Right.
the risk.
Yeah, I agree. Only the caller has the context on what the correct behavior is, not the app itself.
Mhm.
And a config switch is an app-wide switch.
I mean, it still de-risks the change, right? Because I don't think we're like updating any of our code to be completely reliant on distinguishing. So let's go into this behavioral change more. So the issue is that empty strings and nulls are indistinguishable.
Yes.
I mean, even with the current iConfiguration section, you could, if you wanted to make a behavioral breaking change, like you could just have value be an empty string or null.
Yeah, it's this is the behavior today, but when we got null in the binder, I mean, we don't know about like, is this really null inside?
Okay,
inside
so
the code?
it's about distinguishing between null and an empty section, because you could already distinguish between an empty string and null.
No, it's distinguishing between null and non-existing value in the configuration.
Yeah, that's what I mean by empty. Okay.
Yeah, empty is different thing, but yeah.
Why do we
Fair.
support null keys in the first place? Most places we take keys. Null is explicitly disallowed.
If you look at the configuration section object itself, there is a this value, and I'm
Right.
pretty sure a null key means this as opposed to a child of this.
Right, which is weird, but yeah. Because like normally you use the iConfiguration interface to key into it and not iConfiguration section. But
But one of the ways that you could avoid that, though, is if you add a has value property, then that tells you about whether this dot value is legitimate or not, and then you can make this a proper non-null key.
where you will add has value.
On the configuration section, same place. that
So
you're at.
how this is different between to have this and to have try get value?
The only real change is that it allows you to make the key parameter non-nullable, because having a nullable key parameter is a bit weird. But given the audience that this API is intended for, they might just know what the difference is between null and non-null keys.
Yeah.
Like
Also, you said with such confidence that this bind API worked with iConfiguration section only earlier that I kind of just believed you, but then I double checked, and it is an extension method on iConfiguration, so we do need it.
No,
for
go
configuration
to
root.
go to configuration binder dot bind instance in the beginning. I can send you the link.
Well, I mean, there might be more than one bind. Are we just changing one of the over? I mean, we got to change all.
No,
of
no.
them.
I mean the main entry for the binder is bind instance method. This is the main entry for the binder.
Which is
And if you go
sent
to
iConfiguration. I just dropped the link in chat.
Working.
The bool can be first state, right? True.
No,
false.
I'm not talking about. Let me send you the code. So,
All right, but like this, the behavior of this overload that I just dropped into chat, like would need to change, right? Which extends iConfiguration.
Let me see what. No, I mean like then. Okay, the high level for bind is really using iConfiguration, but at the end, I mean like this internally will call the binder, configuration binder, and configuration binder actually will cast this to the iConfiguration section, so
Right.
it doesn't matter.
But the configuration root is not an iConfiguration section. So I see that. So
Yeah.
the point is you're only going to use this API on subproperties.
Like, just 1 second, I will send you a link to the code.
Okay. I mean, to get like really, yeah.
Another thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
I-
this gets really
there is
nuanced,
a-
right? Like,
there is
I
a
haven't
link in-
tried binding configurations to like the JSON literal null or the empty string. So you know, when we're talking about binding to the root, we'll
Yeah,
have to think about those scenarios.
Yeah, you can see here, this is in the bind instance, which is the entry point for the binder. It's first thing, it's just get that section as iConfiguration section and get the value from here. So it doesn't matter about, because like iConfiguration section is actually inherits iConfiguration. So whatever iConfiguration you are sending here, it get casted to iConfiguration section. So we are not really breaking anything in this regard with this change, because this is how stuff work today.
Because you always call get children first before trying to.
No,
To bind
children
values.
will get next. If you see line 355, this is where it check if there is any children or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So you're saying for the configuration root, if it had no children, you wouldn't call this API, so you're fine. And if it has children, you have configuration sections at that point, probably.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is how's the behavior today.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Like, I have a question. Like, why cannot just the customer who like wants this? Like, to me, like this is a really weird request in general. Like, I cannot see the usage for this. Like, an example, you have a bool value, so like
So this
nullable
this
value, right?
this API is not most of the time is not going to be
But like, why
called by the user. It's going to be called by the binder.
But like,
so
why
it's-
cannot customer create a class with their own setter, which tells them if it was set or not?
Sorry, I'm not following. Can you say it again?
when they deserialize to a specific, like maybe I'm missing the context a bit here, but like if they say deserialize to a specific bool flag on the class, why cannot they just create a setter with the, like, was this property set or not? And they will have the knowledge if it was touched by the deserializer or not.
No, how they will know that?
Because like if the moment you call the setter,
okay, so okay, just to make it worse. So we have a different providers. I mean, so every provider can decide about the behaviors they read the configuration. So as I mentioned about like JSON provider today is converting nulls to empty string. So in this scenario, the null get converted to empty string and it will be set. If somebody want to check the property, they will see it's set while it's wrong. It's
Right,
set
but we
to
could
wrong
change
value.
that behavior, right? That's what you were saying earlier. Like we could just be like, oh, if it's null, set it to null and not the empty string. Like that's a breaking change, but like so is this. And then you don't need the new API, right? Like instead of returning the empty string, we could just return null in this case.
Return null where?
So in the case where it was currently giving you the empty string and you want null, right?
Yes.
Like why can't you just make it null? Like, is it because we don't want to?
Yeah, because the binder will get null and they will see it's I don't know if it is null or empty or non-existing, and it will assume it's non-existing, so it will not set at all.
Right, but like the value on iConfiguration section can already be null or the empty string. Those are two valid values.
Right.
Yes.
Like,
The
you
empty
can
string's a
already-
red herring. Ignore the empty string. It can't tell the difference between you said foo : null and you didn't say foo : at all.
Well, right. So for the empty string, I think we should distinguish for it being
Yeah, it's
colon.
already distinguished. So if you have configuration with the value empty string today, it works fine. No problem. The only issue is when you have a null value in the configuration and you will send it, I mean, the binder will get this value, doesn't know if it exists or not. And as I mentioned about like JSON provider converts the null string to empty string. And we honor empty string anyway, and empty string will be set, which is supposed to be null value instead of empty string.
Wait, so where is the null string getting converted into the empty string today?
And the JSON provider, configuration provider.
So at the provider level. So how is the section, like, isn't that above the provider? So how is the new API in the section helping you? Because like if the configuration section can figure out if it's null or an empty string, it could return null or the empty string already with the value property.
Okay, so in JSON configuration provider, we are changing it with this change. So instead of returning empty string, it will return null. This is the normal, I mean, logical behavior. So we are changing the provider, JSON provider for this. In addition to that, I mean, like, you know, to distinguish between null and non-existing, so we're adding this new API to do that.
Okay, then why do we need to distinguish between null and non-existing? Because like,
because if you have a value that it's null in the configuration, I mean, okay, imagine you have object which have string property, and this string property has some value, like whatever, I mean, some string. And you binding to null configuration, what you expect to get.
okay, thank you. I think I now, so we're changing the provider, so the section will have this information, and we
Right.
could distinguish between null and the empty string, but it is tri-state, so we want to know all three possible things, like whether it's a string, a null, or not there.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions about that?
Why is this virtual?
Yeah, because as I mentioned about like if somebody today want to implement their own configuration, custom configuration, not using so today they are implementing iConfiguration section interface.
right?
Yeah, so if they want to implement try get value, so they at that time they need to change instead of implementing configuration section interface, they need to extend configuration section class, and they can override try get value at that time.
Does that mean that the existing non-virtual methods are going to be written in terms of this virtual method, so everything's going to go through to dispatch?
So configuration section class mostly is implementing configuration section itself. So you can think about it like this is kind of implementing configuration section, and I don't think it has many methods that it's non-virtual or something like this will affect whatever happens there.
Okay, because this is kind of the first time where we're encouraging somebody to subclass this type, and adding virtual methods to a type that you expect people to subclass tends to be a really scary thing.
Especially when it already implements interface methods, which is how it's normally used, and they're not virtual. Like I would be tempted just to make this a new interface that's implemented by configuration section.
If we do it, I will not do it interface, because if we need to extend it more in the future, we will run into the same problem. So at that time, we will expose it as abstract class instead of new interface. And
Would be the base class of section and root.
Yeah, no, it would be a base class for the configuration section.
That seems weird.
Yeah, this is why, I mean, we went into different options, and we found, like, as I mentioned about, like, not many people really, I mean, implementing their own configuration outside today. So this is very narrow scenario. And for this narrow scenario, I mean, like, if somebody really want to do it, so at that time they can just implement, extend configuration section class, and this will be acceptable.
But this is weird, though, because the configuration section class, so if you implement this method, implementing this method is basically giving you the implementation of configuration root, for lack of a better term, right? Because that's the thing that configuration section gets all of its data from today. But configuration section also takes an configuration root as a constructor parameter. It's a mandatory constructor parameter. So if I'm going to subclass a configuration section object, do I need to specify a custom configuration root and a custom try get value method? Like, that seems weird, doesn't it?
No, I mean, like, most people using, people implementing configuration today implement configuration sections. So they will be only interested in the methods that our properties exposed from configuration section. And if somebody want to extend the configuration section class, they will be interested in those only, I mean, like, to implement those. But they don't have to care about, like, what is the root and what is anything else, because this will be their own implementation of the configuration.
Yeah, but
you think
in order to instantiate the type, it's a mandatory constructor parameter.
Tarek, would you be mad if we made this non-virtual? Like, do you think people actually need to override this?
Well, what I was getting at is, if you make this virtual, I think you also need to add a parameterless protected constructor to configuration section. That's ultimately what I'm getting at.
And then make a bunch more things virtual.
This might be the only thing you would need to make virtual.
Wait, then how would any of the parameterless things work without a root field?
So the configuration section default implementation would rely on the configuration root that's passed in as a constructor parameter. The default implementation of the virtual method would rely solely on that. And if you subclass it and override the virtual method, well, you're providing your own implementation.
Right, but there are a lot of non-virtual methods that depend on that constructor parameter.
The indexer and the value properties don't, like, they could dispatch into the virtual method. Key and path can't, unfortunately. But you could have someone specify those in the constructor. Like, again, the thing I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around is that if the scenario here is for somebody to configure the values that are coming back to you, they still have to give you an configuration root, or else they can't even construct one of these things in the first place. So
Sorry, I mean, like, why when extending configuration section you need to call the base constructor at all? I mean, like, you can have your own constructor that is not calling at all the configuration section constructor that takes root. Why?
How?
But there's no
Yeah.
constructor that doesn't take a root.
Yeah, no, that's what Levi's saying you should add, but like a default constructor. But even that's not super clean because the path and stuff.
yeah, that's what makes me think that the proposal as specified is incomplete, because I think you need to change how the object is constructed, not just make the method virtual. But I might be missing something there.
I think you're right, Levi. But what if we just made it non-virtual? Like, why do we expect people to override this?
Because iConfiguration root has no way of saying whether something exists or not, does it?
But the default implementation apparently. So how's the default implementation going to work? It's not abstract. Like, I mean, there is a default implementation that apparently just depends on the current constructor. I think what he said is that the JSON configuration provider is going to change behavior. So the root should give us enough information via the providers.
Well, the root literally just has an indexer that returns a nullable string.
The root has a list of providers that the binder iterates through, or an IEnumerable.
Oh, I see.
This is just okay. Awesome.
So instead of
So
the custom implementation from the JSON provider wouldn't actually dispatch to the root. It would enumerate through all of the elements in the root, and then add them manually to its own backing collection.
Tarek, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So then the JSON provider literally has no root that it's going to pass into the constructor, because there's no useful root. I guess you could get the key in the path from it.
Okay. Yeah. For now, we can make it non-virtual. I mean, is it possible in the future if we decided to make it virtual, this would be another breaking change or not?
Oh man, that's a technicality. I don't think it would actually break anything compiled with the C# compiler last time I checked, but I don't know.
There's various edge cases where the C# compiler will not emit a callvert and will do a direct call. But historically, we've said that making a method virtual is non-breaking.
Yeah.
Okay, so if this is the case, so we can make this non-virtual for now and see if somebody really want to have this functionality to be in their custom configuration. We can just either make it this virtual and have a new constructor for configuration section, or we can have fully new abstract class or something else at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, my vote's still a new interface, but I do prefer making this non-virtual if we're going to add a member to the configuration section, unless we do the work to make it more abstract.
But that's still a behavioral breaking change, though, because when you instantiate a configuration section object, previously it did not enumerate the root that was passed in. Now it will.
Yeah, I didn't think we were trying to avoid behavioral breaking changes.
I mean, that seems like a much more significant breaking change than whether you return null or empty string. Because
Enumerating the providers.
Well, now you're actually changing how the underlying provider is accessed by the wrapping object. That's the type of thing that tends to break people.
No, I'm not getting this, Levi. So the new added one is not going to change anything from what we are doing today, except about when you are trying to call try get value. This is a new API. we will use the root to get this value from there.
But how would you actually get that information without enumerating the root?
We will not enumerate the root because the root itself has APIs that it's similar to this try get value. So we will call this one from the root and we'll get it.
I didn't see such an API. That's what confused me.
Yeah, I can show
Yeah,
you.
actually, yeah, to that point, like the provider has try get. I don't think you get that without the provider. Now, to be clear, all the root is doing is iterating the providers too by default, but I think Levi maybe is more concerned about customized configuration roots. I don't know.
No, I see that it's on the provider. That's what I was missing. Okay.
Yeah, it is on the provider, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Then that should be okay.
That's why you have to enumerate the provider. But once you have it, yeah, you're accessing it the same way the root itself would.
Okay, then that should be okay.
So I pasted the code. I mean, just calling the root try get configuration, this one. So we are not enumerating anything here. We're just calling the root to get the value.
Is that an extension method?
It must be.
Because it's on the interface, yeah.
Because I mean, it's not on the interface, so it must be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so today the root is already supporting this. I mean, this is the only way we are doing today.
And I don't see that at all in
I
source.net.
Yeah, neither do I.
So that must be new.
uh,
All right. I mean, we've spent 30 minutes on this, and so far we've said remove the word virtual. Are we happy with it without the word virtual? Do we need to can it, or is there actually still more discussion?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think you're good.
Do the nullability annotations on iConfiguration indexer and get section need to be updated to say that they support a nullable key since they're actually supporting it today?
Oh, yeah.
No, I thought that the nullable key was actually special cased by the configuration section itself, not the interface.
No, the way that configuration section is handling it right now is it's just doing a plus operation with no validation of key, and doing string plus null treats it
Right.
as string plus empty.
Yeah, but that's for the existing indexer, which takes a non-nullable key.
Right.
It says it takes a non-nullable key, but then it functionally allows a nullable key.
Sure. I would think that this method would literally special case a nullable key, though.
Yeah, but should the other two methods that currently allow a nullable key and say that they don't be updated to indicate that they do allow the nullable key?
I mean, then they'd be having a different annotation than the interface, and I don't want to think about what that means.
Hmm.
The key is generally an input parameter, so making that nullable I think would be okay, but I don't know. Might want to make sure that it like does what we want because it adds the key delimiter and stuff.
But now the interface and the method are the interface and the concrete implementation have different annotations if you do that, which is weird.
Yeah, and we wouldn't want to update the interface probably.
It's also weird to accept null when you say that you don't allow null, because most people are going to expect it to throw if null were passed in.
I mean, if you wanted to make the indexer nullable, then you could always make the interface implementation explicit. That way you don't break the link between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the interface vtable binder cares about nullable annotations. Just
It doesn't, but you definitely don't want to change the interface, though, because if someone has implemented the interface, you're now changing the contract out from under them. Because now they would
interfaces
have to...
don't specify contracts; they specify syntax. That's why they're terrible.
Fair. But the thing is, if you implement an interface, you have a reasonable belief that if somebody invokes a method that implicitly implements the interface API, then you don't have to worry about nulls coming in. But if the interface changes to say, hey, these are now valid, you now have a reasonable expectation somebody might pass that into you. So you have to make a defensive change within your code. You're right, none of this is enforced, but that's why I keep talking about reasonable expectations.
Well, and then like we have all kinds of interfaces throughout the BCL where we do actually define a contract and a requirement for how they're implemented. Like IEquatable has a very strict contract, and if you're not following it, then it is considered an invalid implementation.
Yeah.
I mean, same is true for most interfaces. It's just the language can only enforce so much. But yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't change the existing indexer.
I don't care as much. I definitely think it's good to take this change over not changing it. I still would have preferred a new interface, but I think this is good. So, yeah.
I mean, once this goes through, maybe we can figure out a nice way to get like a proper new interface in there in a natural way. Thanks for the example, Tarek. That helps.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. Yeah, it's very helpful.
All right. Do we have Adam with us today?
We do.
All right. Add APIs to read the assembly name info of an assembly file 113749. Mr. Sitnik.
Yes. So to tell the long story short, for .NET 9, we have introduced assembly name info, which is like assembly name. However, it's immutable and it does not instantiate culture infos instances, which can be dangerous in certain situations. And to create those, we have introduced two methods for parsing, parse and try parse. The one throws, the other doesn't, and a constructor where we need to provide everything in explicit way. The original poster here is asking us to extend two types that expose similar information, like culture, flags, names, public key, and version, to also be able to return assembly name info. And I think the major advantage here is that the users would not need to deal with string handle and blob handle to turn string handle into string and blob handle into immutable array of bytes. So this is for assembly definition and assembly reference. They are pretty similar. The third method, if you could scroll down a bit, Jeremy. The original poster also suggests that we extend assembly name info with get assembly name info method that takes a string and returns an assembly name info. To be honest, I'm not sure if it's the best thing because we already provide the parse method and try parse, and they are taking read-only span of characters, which is more flexible than string. So an alternative design is to not include assembly name info dot get assembly name info method. And the last method, metadata reader. So far, we let the users get assembly definition, but we could also allow them to get assembly name info directly rather than calling get assembly definition and then calling get assembly name info. And when I'm looking at this proposal right now, I think that the fourth method shouldn't be actually taking a parameter and it shouldn't be static, but it's just a very late observation.
So I feel very strongly we should not have assembly name info dot get assembly name info, unless. So the reason is that assembly name info is documented as being safe for any possible input, and unless you can absolutely guarantee that reading an assembly file and extracting an assembly name info is safe for any arbitrary input, we should not expose it as a method.
Yeah, what would the difference between get assembly name info and parse be?
I think it's just the name.
Okay.
That's why I have mentioned in the comments that I'm not sure whether we should actually add it.
No, isn't the parse method, like, doesn't it take an assembly? Wait, is assembly file right?
It says char.
Should be assembly file name miss for us earlier.
I thought it took the actual, like, CLR representation of the assembly and turned it into an assembly name info. Yeah, I'm looking at it's assembly name, not assembly file.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Right. So it's parsing the
Yeah.
string.
Yep,
And
right.
I need to go grab electrons. This laptop's
Yeah.
about to die. Be right back.
Yeah, that's right, Adam. Like, it doesn't actually perform any I/O by itself. It's just taking the CLR representation of the assembly name and parsing it, right?
Which method are
This is what I see. I see parse of assembly name. It's just, I think up there it incorrectly says parse of assembly file.
I can't see assembly file used anywhere.
It's assembly name info.parse up there on the screen.
Yeah, you mean the name of the argument? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that was just a
Yes,
typo.
yes,
Then.
yes.
So is it the same thing as parse though? This new thing?
Yes.
Well, it has the additional step that it's reading a file from disk and then cracking it open, right?
Based
Could
on
you
the
please show the description, because I'm just
based on the title, he wants to get it from a file path, not a.
Right.
okay. In such case, since it's I think unclear, I suggest we don't include this method, because if we extend the reader, with the reader, you need to provide a string or a byte array to get it, so it's clear that it's a file or a string at the last method.
Yep.
And it's actually used in the code samples.
Yeah, and to be clear, the argument that I'm making isn't from an API consistency perspective. The argument that I'm making is that we're adding a dangerous method to a type that is documented as being fully safe. And that,
So to be clear, the API is being proposed, open the file. And the
static
previous
ones.
parse one did not. What?
Right. The parse is reading just the text. System dot reflection, comma, public key token equal whatever, etc.
Yeah, that's correct.
Get assembly name info, I think, is crack it open, read the metadata header, and then say this is the name that it identifies itself as.
right, and that would presumably use PE reader under the covers, and we explicitly document that PE reader must never be used over untrusted inputs.
Dangerous?
No, parse is just parsing a string. It's not
Yeah.
opening a file.
Right.
So
It's you already have the type, you already have the assembly name representation from somewhere else, and you're just like saying, oh, here's the assembly name, here's the culture, here's the public.
So it doesn't need to figure out.
Correct. It doesn't do any file I/O. This would change the security guarantees of the type in a way that I think people.
yeah, I totally agree. This is why I believe that to me, the most beneficial are the first two methods.
Yeah.
And with those, it's easier to get this information, and there is like no place for mistake.
Right. Because assuming you already know how to get a metadata reader, then yeah, right now you'd have to say metadata reader.get assembly definition, and then off that you can now call the new get assembly name info.
Exactly.
So that seems fine to me. So dropping the two statics.
Yep.
And we like the 2 new instance methods being methods and not properties.
These are structs. To me, it's like
And it's allocating a new class.
if it's a property, do we always create a new one? Do we store it and increase the stack size? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just asking the question. I'm not actually disagreeing with it. So
Okay.
making sure we're happy instead of just taking it because it was what was written.
The methods tend to be fine because they indicate to the caller like some work is going to be performed.
And if I remember correctly, both of them expose get custom attribute methods or something similar. So they do have some get methods that, as Levi said, perform some work.
If you made it a property, the property would have to be cached on demand? Like, that could be a bit strange.
I mean, if all of these things are redundant off of assembly name info, then you would just invert them, and culture would be the backing assembly name info.culture, and flags would be the backing assembly name info.flags. And
I don't know if you could get a string handle from that though.
fair enough. But if any of these things live in assembly name info, you could pull them off of the struct and just have it defer to the assembly name info that it's now containing. But saying it's a method and it composes it on the fly is fine. Okay, I guess I should double check chat. There's already a get assembly name method.
Yes, but it's get assembly name, not get assembly name info.
Is it easy to go from assembly name to assembly name info? Because we could consider making that easier for people.
I think the assembly name is defined in system reflection, and assembly name info in system reflection metadata.
Yeah.
So there is a way to get assembly name from assembly name info, but there is no other way around except of calling the assembly name info constructor and providing all of the values like culture name, develop, etc.
I mean, you could have an accelerator constructor which takes an assembly name and just cracks everything open for you, and then gives you back an info if you want.
Right, but
Yes, we could, but one of the things we wanted to achieve was to get the users, to actually stop using assembly name, because they can fall into this trap of this hidden static cache in assembly name.
That's not the only thing that you have.
Yeah, so we would prefer if they just get started with assembly name info and forget about assembly.
Okay.
That was my goal.
So you want kind of a nice clean breakdown.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
so then Chad asks, are we going to obsolete get assembly name?
What would we benefit from doing that?
You'd smack people who call it and tell them to call assembly name info.
Yes, but if they use it with trusted input, there is no issue.
What get assembly name method are we talking about? Assembly name dot get assembly name?
We're talking about the entire assembly name type. Making it obsolete.
Sorry, I mean, again, I don't know where there's already an assembly name method is talking about. I don't know if it's from assembly reference, assembly definition, or one of the two types that we aren't modifying now.
Assembly name has a static method on it. I think it's literally just called get assembly name that takes a path as a parameter, and it opens the DLL, loads the assembly name, and just returns it to you.
I don't recall, so I'm not sure.
But you use it on a DLL that you intend to load.
Right.
That's kind of a trustable form.
If there's not already a get assembly name on either of these types, then I don't think there's anything we'd want to start marking as obsolete.
Yes, and after we have introduced the info type, there was a follow-up in our internal tooling, and I saw also in other repositories that, for example, wanted to keep it in dictionary to have a cache because it's immutable. And so far, nobody has asked for this constructor. And But of course, if anybody listening has a certain scenario that is not supported, please feel free to create an issue and specify the exact details.
Okay, and now we'll see how fast Tanner can burn through some intrinsics things.
Yeah, so most of these are just trying to fix some minor nuances that were found between review and what actually got implemented. This first one, the original review ended up, I guess we skimmed over the names for some of the parameters, and we ended up using base and bases when it should have been address and addresses. For consistency with all of our other APIs, and also because base is an illegal parameter name unless you put an @ in front of it. So it's just changing the parameters there to be correct.
All right, so all of these are base to address.
And
then
bases to addresses.
Okay. Any objections? I think that's a record for an intrinsics API.
We need more travel budget to twist in your states.
Alright, have I now click this an even or an odd number of times? Oh my god, laptop. Alright.
Yeah, so for this one, there was a couple APIs where the name was slightly incorrect, and we noticed an inconsistency between them. For example, we ended up approving load vector byte sign extend to int64. The input is an S byte, and so it should have been named load vector S byte sign extend to int64. There's a similar inconsistency for found for the uint16, uint32 APIs as well, where we ended up approving something that in this case had the signed name. It should have been the unsigned name.
Everywhere here I see ushort as the, or ushort or uint as the pointer type, and we have u's, and then these are s bytes as the pointer types, and we have s's. So looks good as amended. All right, multi-register loads.
Yeah, this was a different one than I was expecting. Hold on. So for this set, we we basically ended up the SVE load APIs are a bit more confusing than the Advanced SIMD load APIs are. The names ended up changing slightly between them for the underlying instructions because of slightly different semantics. And so we ended up reviewing and approving the APIs as load vector by 2, load vector by 3, load vector by 4, but the instructions they correspond to were actually load vector and unzip, because it ends up loading the 2 and then interleaving them, or de-interleaving them as part of the operation. And so there's actually instructions for both of these sets of APIs. And so the proposal, which is just below, is that we should have the full set here, which is we should have the load vector 2x, load vector 3x, load vector 4x, and we should have the load vector 2x and unzip. So if you scroll down slightly, it shows the full set there. Basically, we approved one set, the other set ended up getting implemented, but we need all 6 of the APIs in total. And so we should just have the whole set approved.
Why did the X and the numeral flip?
I think the numeral before looks better, honestly.
I think we ended up fixing that to be in line with, we had done the original approval, and then we ended up thinking about places where it didn't line up with other APIs. We ended up changing that in a different API review. And then the SVE APIs, because they were experimental, didn't end up getting the fix to match the changed convention.
Okay.
And so 128. Trying to find the Advanced SIMD API where we ended up finding the actual name.
Yeah, I mean, if numeral followed by the X is more consistent with something else, then yes, but otherwise it looks like an arbitrary change. Hence the question.
Okay, here's what it is. These names are slightly wrong too. We ended up going with load, then number, then X, then vector. So we ended up going with load 2x vector 128 and load 2x vector, because we ended up saying that the x2 or the 2x after caused confusion and mixing with other numbers.
And you say we decided that. Is that API review decided that somewhere, or you just while implementing it?
That was API review deciding it, and that was done. I can find the issue here in a second, but it was done for the Advanced SIMD APIs.
Okay, just trying to understand which we you're talking about. So.
Yeah. Yes. We as an API review.
So that means that the consistent name on this would actually be load 2x vector.
Yes, load 2x vector and then load 2x vector and unzip.
And that's because you have load 2x vector 128. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because part of the load vector 2x is it looks like load vector 2. And vector 2 is a type.
Right.
Yeah.
And we had the whole discussion there of ordering and actually first or last.
Because I'm thinking like load vector 2x128 almost sounds like you're doing matrix stuff. Which
I think is why we decided 2x vector 128. So move the...
Yeah. Which I mean, maybe you are doing some matrix operations with that. Yeah. Okay, fair.
GitHub search is not helping me right now. It's not like partial words.
I mean, it does look like there is a load to X vector 128 and unzip, and that should be a pretty good match target.
Yeah, we reviewed February of last year in 97831. Where the notes on the original change was.
Only 5 digits? That's like a baby issue. Boop. Yep.
Yeah, I had to go into Outlook and search because that ended up finding the issue better than the GitHub search did. Yay, meeting notes.
Alright, well. Be aware that this one says that your proposal of this is what we implemented, please approve it, is we didn't approve what you implemented, so you have to change it again.
Yeah.
Alright, other comments? Cool. Okay, load vector non-faulting FFR something.
Yes, so the FFR stands for first faulting register. Basically, the way that on Intel and AMD, you've got masked loads, and the way they work is you just provide a mask, and it does the operation according to the mask. If any entry that is actually read from memory faults, it just raises a fault, which works because you know the exact length. And so you expect everything that's there to be read. With SVE on ARM, you don't know the length of the vector statically, and so you don't necessarily know how much data you're going to be able to read. And so they have the instructions that allow you that are called non-faulting, and what they do is they read the data, and then they have an additional register called the first faulting register, which ends up being a product after the read telling you how much of the data is valid and if any data ended up crossing a page boundary and causing a fault or similar, so you know that it's been zeroed and it should be excluded from any operation you're doing. When doing that operation, there are sometimes cases where you want to provide your own mask up front in addition to indicate that you expect a more limited subset to be read. For example, you might be only working with 3 elements, and so you know you want to read 3 elements, but you still want it to indicate a fault if anything further than that is there. And so the APIs for load vector non-faulting still need to take a mask as the first parameter, and that's what this API, that's what this proposal is changing it. It's changing it from being just byte address to taking both the mask and the address.
In the scenario you just gave, is that I require you to read at least 3 vectors, and if you read more than that, cool, but don't give me less than 3.
The masks are basically merged, so it's not going to say read me at least 3 or fault. There's a different API for that. It's going to say read no more than 3.
Okay.
Essentially, it provides an upper limit on how much it should read. That way, it doesn't spend additional time trying to figure out faults beyond that mask boundary.
And then you'll want to know how many, if any, of those 3 succeeded.
Right.
Okay.
And I assume mask as the first parameter is intentional for ISA reasons or whatever. And,
right. It matches with the instruction.
And it's always the return type is the parameter type of the mask.
Correct.
Okay.
and these expect to work with aligned addresses, it seems, because you have like short and int as the short and int pointer as the address instead of void star.
Yes, the intrinsics have platform specific behavior for alignment. In general, we expect that things are naturally aligned. If type punning or pointer punning is allowed on that platform, then users are expected to just do their own casting in that case. Like on Intel, there is no faulting by default unless you flip a switch, but we still say it takes float star anyways.
Okay. So this is the expectation, and if you violate it, know what you're doing.
Yeah.
All right. Multi-register loads.
Didn't we review
Oh.
this one already?
I guess it.
See multi-register store.
Yeah, multi-register stores.
Yeah. So similar to the load, we approved store, but there also needs to be store and zip. So there should be both sets of APIs.
And it's taking tuples.
Yes, which is what we've done for the other hardware intrinsic APIs. Because they are special, they are platform specific, they're never going to change, and the runtime expects a tuple for its signature handling. Same reason the load ones return a tuple.
Are the name values adding any value? Did we do that for the return? For the load?
I believe we did so for the load.
Okay. Well, at least it's consistent.
Yeah, it's better than the name of item 1, item 2.
Yeah, I mean,
No, I guess we didn't do it there.
at least what you showed here didn't name them.
I honestly am fine with leaving them unnamed since the names are kind of meaningless. But sure.
Well,
Yeah, we should probably do the same thing for both.
Is the idea for the rights that you expect someone to have the tuple already in a local variable and then they pass that tuple in, or that they're literally going to write at the call site like open parens sub value comma
either
other
works.
values? Okay.
Yeah, the JIT handles either. So for advanced SIMD, we did actually name them value 1, value 2. So they should probably be named value 1, value 2 here and on the load API.
Okay. One indexed, very nice.
I mean, that's the same as item 1 and item 2, I guess. We're Lua now, right, or something. What else is MATLAB? What else is one index?
No one wants to say VB.
Oh, VB. You know what? I was never a VB programmer. I didn't even know, but that makes sense.
There you go. Left a note. Okay. So your top thing says you approved, or we approved 4. You made 4 zips, and then down here it says you want 4 stores, but only 3 zips.
There should be 4 zips there. Oh no, it's there's only 3 zips because you can't zip 1 value. That's the same as store.
Okay.
Basically, the zip is going to do value 1 index 0, value 2 index 0, up to value n index 0, and then it's going to go back through the 1s, the 2s.
Rotated matrix, very nice.
that was this one. So now the only thing left marked for 10, SLHDSA. Are you with us, Pranav?
Yep, I'm
Okay.
here.
I have a very tiny view of the room, so. All right, you want to take it away?
Sure. Okay, so SLH DSA, this is somewhat similar to MLCAM, which we approved a couple of weeks ago, but this is for digital signing. So there's a couple of different APIs. So if you go through, okay, let me just mention the similarities. So import, export all the PKCS8 and subject public key info, that's all the same. So ideally, there shouldn't be any API changes. That's, if you scroll down a little bit, but we can get started from the top. So let's see, is supported algorithm. Okay, so sign data, verify data. These are the same as other crypto APIs for signing and verifying, except that this one does. The PQC algorithms have the concept of pure, so you don't need to provide hashing for these variants. So besides that, you just have the data that you're signing, optional context, and then the read-only span variants and the deport methods, which derived classes could implement. Same thing for verify. And then there's the pre-hash variant, which assumes that you get the hash and you tell us what the hash ID is, and then we'll sign it and then verify it.
Levi, I can hear you thinking.
No, I'm.
Okay.
So I guess one open question was the hash algorithm OID, whether we wanted to be a string or hash algorithm name or something else. Right now we left it as a string OID. OpenSSL and Windows are gonna probably they do something different here. OpenSSL will take any OID, whereas Windows is only a fixed set, and we historically have used hash algorithm name to represent that, but there's not a great one-to-one mapping for the extensible, the XLFs for like shake and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I can imagine people getting tripped up by that, just because people aren't necessarily used to working with OIDs as strings within .NET, but you also have to look at the target audience for this API who might actually just be okay with it.
we do have strongly typed OIDs, but
Yeah.
I don't know if we have precedent.
You mean like the proper OID class?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that the issue with that is it's mutable, which is unfortunate.
It's semi-mutable.
Like we're not doing anything multi-threaded here, right?
No, it's just it's just one of those types that's painful to use because of some design decisions way back when.
I mean, it also has the problem of it doesn't verify that, or it doesn't guarantee that the thing in the value property is a dotted decimal OID. So it, like, if you get it from us, it's a reasonable value unless it's off of curve 25519, which Windows believes has no dotted decimal OID. And generally we've been not adding the OID type on things.
But in this case, though, you can imagine that the typical use case would be people would just have a bunch of const strings with the various OIDs they care about, right?
Yeah, I mean that's how we have it. So if they were to,
And we don't accept the friendly name, right?
Correct.
No.
Okay. That seems okay.
Yeah. So from the OpenSSL provider perspective, because they're going to take any OID, us inserting we want the hash algorithm name and map it, mean that if you sign something if you have a way to hash something with an exotic algorithm that we don't know about, OpenSSL will let you convey the pre-hash combination on that, and we would be blocking it. We can better go from OID back to a name, assuming that Windows wants the hash name. I don't remember if Windows has even finished implementing this yet. For SLHDSA, I know they haven't, because they haven't done the algorithm at all.
yeah, for MLDSA they have it, and they do take the name.
Yeah. So Windows will be more limited on, OpenSSL will be more flexible on.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative is to like accept a friendly name, and people could pass a friendly name for Windows, and we'll be more flexible when Windows adds something. But that seems like not the right approach.
Yeah, the algorithm wants the dotted decimal. Wait, does it want the dotted decimal OID, or does it want the Turing coded OID?
But it wants an OID though.
Which algorithm?
But you can imagine that if you did need to be extensible to facilitate, Windows adding new stuff at a moment's notice, you could always have some sidecar API which keeps a mapping of OIDs to friendly names.
Yeah.
And you could introduce that
like
when the time comes.
Yeah. I don't really expect that to, I mean, maybe, I don't know. I guess I don't have historical background, but I don't know if they'll really add new hashes that frequently that we need to immediately react.
It would be really. Yeah. The only real point where it would matter is if, say, they added something in the future, like a year from now, and then we said, oh, we want to get that capability into .NET 10, even though it's already shipped. Right? Yeah. And the options there are, well, we could service .NET 10 and just have support for it, or have a sidecar and just say, do the mapping yourself. Mm-hmm. But servicing works too, like we know how to do it.
Yeah, the other part is the signed prehash is actually not in like most of the IETF specs for like certs and CMS. They prefer the pure form. Mm-hmm. So I would even say it's not a huge priority.
Let's just keep it how it is.
And then, there's a question of, do we like the method name as well?
Yeah, so from my understanding for the other crypto APIs, there's a signed data and then a signed hash, where the signed data will hash the data and then send it to signed hash. But this is not the same. Signed data has its own complete implementation, doesn't use signed prehash or anything. So there should be a different name, but I don't know. I mean, it's like prehash is the right name.
Yeah. Thanks.
There's hash SLHDSA. I think that's what FIPS uses.
So the spec calls them SLH sign and hash SLH sign.
Yeah.
But but then the reference or the description, they say pre-hash, and then personally I feel that the insertion of pre here is really to call it out as different than the other, than RSA. It's not signed data and sign hash, and they're a pair. Signed prehash is a different signing algorithm. You do not get the same signature as if you do the underlying hash computations.
But again, if you're using this type, presumably you have a particular scenario that dictates which method you use.
Right. I'm just saying, while we all want to feel comfortable with the name, I'm saying that the insertion of the PRE here is to intentionally not have the same shape of a signature as RSA sign hash.
Right.
Yeah, if people are doing it for crypto agility, moving over, they should not just get sign hash, right? They should have to.
This is a foot gun, because every spec says never use it, and this is the one you want. So
thank you for not subclassing asymmetric algorithm.
We talked about that with Kim. So
yeah.
Cool. I think those are the main things with that.
Silly question. Remember how with GCM there was this whole issue about people might pass really small tags into the verify method, and it would allow attackers to cause various payloads to authenticate properly. Is that potentially an issue here if you have any type of sponge function? Or not sponge, but a variable length output digest?
So these... Oh, you're talking about the message being too small?
Either the hash or the signature, where an attacker could spook it. It's one of those things where I don't think we would actually change the implementation at all, because we require people to actually know how to use it properly, assuming that that's an issue here. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things that I wonder if we need to dock.
So they're, they're complicated on the things, but where they do talk about taking the shakes, they talk about taking fixed size output of shake.
Okay.
So that if you use 2.16.840.1.101.3.4.2.11, then that should be a 256 bit output.
Is that the actual rate?
Yeah, because I still have the page of the tab that I moved back over to my other
Okay,
window.
okay.
Oh, you didn't do it for memory.
I thought you did it from memory.
No. I'm not that much of a nerd. I'm a nerd, but I'm not that much of a nerd.
Well, yeah, so that's the other complication of not using hash algorithm name, is
Yeah.
because these hash algorithms, Shake 128 refers to both the extensible version and the one used here, which is fixed size. They'll say fixed output size. So yeah, all the ones used here are fixed.
Yeah, and if it's incumbent on the caller to know that, then that's okay.
Yeah, and we'll have to figure out how Windows wants to handle the Shake 128 with 256-bit output OID turning back into the string Shake 128, them turning it back into the right OID. That's on them. But I mean, that we'll have to work with them on that one.
Okay.
Is there more than just passing the right algorithm name? Because
Well,
their API is taking the name.
right. The question is, if somebody else adds a new OID for Shake 128 with I don't know what would be a stupid number, 196-bit output. Like, we would get the OID, and then we'd have to turn it into a string that Windows would understand. And I guess we'll have to wait for them to add a string that is that particular output. So,
Mhm.
whereas with OpenSSL, it'll just work because they get to tell us what the final OID is,
Yeah.
which
I
is what the
assume
algorithm wants.
Maybe they'll change it. Yeah, for now, this all we have.
Do you expect that somebody will create an instance of this using the static import routines?
Yeah.
Then should the constructor be internal instead of protected?
It's protected so that you can, have like the CNG version.
Yeah, you can create your own instances. Import is one method of doing it, so we'll provide our own default implementations, but you can have your own implementations, like Jeremy said, the CNG, or I think Key Vault was one of them, but you can have your own if you want. The import is just the built-in one, so it'll be like bcrypt, and then for OpenSSL, there's only one, so OpenSSL.
The static imports are like rsa.create. You get the platform version, and if you care, then you need to figure out how to import one into CNG directly.
Well, then why is supported a static if someone can provide their own implementation?
It's the same as we've done for all of our algorithms. The static says whether or not the methods will work. The static methods on the class will work. But yes, you could, on a Windows system, see slhdsa.isSupported return false, and then because you happen to be using slhdsa Key Vault, it means it's not actually being computed on box. So if you get an instance from Key Vault, it'll totally work.
Okay.
But the static methods would all fail.
Well, so there's also another wrinkle that is supported on Apple OSs. They're not going to support this, not for SLHDSA, but for MLDSA, they're not going to support one of the N algorithms that we have. And this would return is supported because we implemented, the generic, way of doing it. And then if you try one of the parameter sets that we don't implement, then you'll get an error when you call the methods themselves.
Right. So is supported is we can create an instance for you, and if you have an instance or some other means, have fun.
Yep, and we have other algorithm types that holds true for.
Like, do we need something to interact with the X509? Like, because currently X509, the copy with private key, like that won't work with the custom implementation, like unless you are able to provide the private parts, right? And like for the Key Vault, like you cannot do that because you don't know them.
So copy with private key will work if you pass your own in. We'll export, PKG
But like, what
data.
if you don't have anything to export for the private?
Then it won't work, but that's the way that it works if you derive an RSA or a ECDSA or
But like we expect to have the implementation for the Azure Key Vault, right?
Azure Key
So, like,
Vault
if-
instances can never be bound to a certificate because they can't. Like the private keys on the private key bound to a certificate always needs to be the platform native thing because we just pass those pointers down to SSL string.
Yeah, that's why I asked if we need something for that.
I don't.
You make it always make an encrypt provider.
Yeah, it would be failing in a consistent way if someone complains. We can invent a way of describing it, but we've never had anyone complain yet that they had an RSA key vault and they couldn't call copy with private key. Because key vault keys are never exportable.
Yeah. Continuing, I'll skip over.
Well,
so
SLHDSA, the spec, calls its version of private key secret key. In each of the algorithms, we've tried sticking with the terminology from its own local specification, but because public key is an overly generic name, we've inserted SLHDSA in the method name, and because secret key is a very generic description, we've inserted SLHDSA. So while the spec doesn't actually call it the SLHDSA secret key, they're like, I'm the SLHDSA spec, this is the secret key. I glued words together.
Sure.
Okay.
Um,
These were skipping by the convention we established from Chem.
Yep. And then SLHDSA algorithm, a bunch of them here. Same as Chem.
Except, so I know we all hate underscores, but the names, it's SHA-2 followed by a number.
Yeah.
And that's the best we came up with for SHA-3, so that's what we did here.
That's fine.
Also, look, it makes them the same length. That wasn't intentional. Was not intentional.
It's the least worst thing you could do.
Could have put a B there for bits.
No, because then they'll ask what SHA-2B is.
Well, X, obviously.
And they want-
SHA-2B or B.
Yep, I was like, and then they'll want SHA-2 not to be. So, right. Yep, we're nerds. All right. I think we're to the OpenSSL type.
Yep. SLHDSA OpenSSL. Same thing as Chem, but yeah, it's just you get the duplicate handle from the underlying OpenSSL provider, and then you can copy it. Cert. So okay, so these the next few, I guess this doesn't need namespace. This already exists for the other keys, but we're adding it for SLHDSA certificate requests. So you can create the certificate request with your SLHDSA key, public key, same thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's 509 cert. So this is copying with the private keys. This is the attaching the private key to the cert. And then get SLHDSA private key, public key, something. The signature generator, very similar for the other DSA algorithms as well. And then the cert key accessor. So this is for down level for, well, I guess out of band, but in Microsoft BCL Crypto, we're putting this in because we don't have access to these on the X509 cert class themselves.
Yeah, this is a pretty well-established pattern.
Yep, we did this same thing for MLChem.
Yeah.
And then the new one is the CMS signer. So this is for signed CMS. And so this one actually, yeah, so there's, again, the constructor for the private key, create a signer with the private key. very similar to other algorithms. But one of the differences is, I think for the other algorithms, they all take asymmetric algorithm as the key. Here, since we don't derive from it, we're gonna add a new one. One of the other parts of this signer API is there's an asymmetric algorithm that hangs off as the key, and when we do SLH DSA, we're not going to be able to expose the key that way, and so we'll just return null there. But instead, we have a has private key, so you can check whether there is a private key associated with this, or if it's just
Is it not weird though that you would have a property has private key return true, and the property private key return null?
I can think of TPM key, and that would make sense in that context.
How would it make sense?
That would be the
For
opposite. right?
TPM key, you cannot extract it, but it has private key.
No, but this is a handle.
I
An
mean,
asymmetric algorithm doesn't necessarily mean that you have the raw key bits. It just means you have a representation of it.
so are you suggesting that the Boolean property to indicate that a key was provided that should not be accessed from the certificate reference should have a different name that has private key?
What would somebody do with this data if has private key returns true? Like, why are they checking that?
Yeah, I didn't find any usages in our code base, to be honest. But if they were using that for the private key, out for getting the private key, they can do the same.
Well, because I'm wondering if is the reason that they actually need to be able to get the original SLDHF or SLHDSA instance? Because if the answer is yes, then you can imagine like a different API that is like, hey, give me the private key of this type, for instance.
Right. So
I think
this property, the private key property, is not can I sign. So we have like CMS signer that you just give a certificate reference to, and then it uses the private key that is attached to that certificate instance to do the signing. But then we also have these scrolling is a thing.
As opposed to just verification.
Where you can say, this certificate might be just a public certificate with no private key data attached, or it has private key data attached, but you're saying instead of calling get RSA private key, use this specific instance. And this is largely the Key Vault scenario of the only way that you can do CMS signing with Key Vault is if we take the cert and key as a pair. So we expose the private key because of the we took a constructor parameter, we should expose it back as a property. But instead of saying we're going to add an SLHDSA property and an MLDSA property and a composite MLDSA property, we're just like, maybe the question you wanted to answer is, does this signer using a explicitly passed in private key reference as opposed to a cert attached reference? So we'll tell you the Boolean state of that. And if you care more, file a reason.
But the reason that you might care about that is that you want to know if you can actually sign, correct? As opposed
you
to
can
just
still
verify.
sign with the cert that has a private key associated. with
We
it.
don't know that the private key that you gave us is actually a private key. Like, until we call sign, we don't know if it's going to work. The question is, are we going to call get blank private key off of the certificate or not? And we can leave the property out entirely and just say, we don't think anybody needs to inspect the state.
No, it sounds like there might be a useful scenario for it, and I'm just wondering if has private key is the wrong name for it. Because the thing is, has private key is interesting for the scenario, I think. I think you both made a good case for that. But from a .NET perspective, has normally means this other property has meaning, and the private key property has no meaning in this case.
So, yes, best alternative name off the top of my head would be explicit key provided.
I mean, that doesn't
Or
necessarily follow our conventions, but
external key provided, or something. But
Customer claims consign.
yeah, but But yeah, like really the answer is I don't know that anybody ever inspects CMS Signer other than in a debugger, and once they're in a debugger, they can see the properties themselves. Well, they can see the
Well,
fields
because the other
themselves.
thing you could consider is like you could have a new property which is private key object or something, and that's just here's the literal object that was passed into the constructor, and it's typed as object question mark, and maybe it's an asymmetric algorithm, maybe it's
I disposable. That's really the common class for now.
Yeah, but
except for now you're urging people to dispose it out from under you.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yes.
we can leave it out, and if people want it in the future, we
Yeah.
can expose it, because I don't see people checking it, at least in the source code, but there's probably, maybe there's.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking that having a separate property which is typed as object might just be more universally useful, because it's like not, it's basically, yes, something was provided, and here it is, as opposed to just something was provided,
Mhm.
right?
that's
I mean,
fair.
my other suggestion was just to like obsolete this private key.
Which you could do and say
And then
use
like
private
if
key object
people
instead.
want it, then in the future we would expose it as like an object, but then then there's a
Yeah,
can't name it private key.
I'm mostly concerned about future proofing, and like if we're going to have to add another property anyway at some point to get the object back, like we
Yeah,
may as well cut out the middleman.
the question is, why would anyone care?
Yeah.
CMS.
That's on the signer info.
The only
sign-
reason anyone would ever care to get that instance is if they were using our CMS signer type to provide their own implementation of the
On the signer
CMS
info.
signing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just debugger inspection.
I mean, which you can do anyway just by looking at the fields.
Right. So,
I would leave it off unless you have a really good reason to add it, but if you have a really good reason to add it, I bet you have a really good reason to add a second property as well.
I'm gonna probably take it off then, and then we can come back and then decide to,
Yep.
to add it.
Yeah,
Because like really like every single user it should be true, right? Because like it's a signer. Like if you cannot sign, then what can it do?
Well, the cert might have the attached private key.
Yeah.
In that case, this
but
would
it
be
has it,
false.
but still has it, arguably, right?
But this would be false. Has private key would be false in that case. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's confusing to people, but
Cannot access it, but it has it.
if you go to the cert, you can do get private key on the cert.
Maybe unless it's a TPM key.
Yeah, that's not what this is checking though. This is just if you provided this extra key.
and a TPM-based key from the natural provider of the system would copy with private key and would get blank private key just fine. It's mainly the scenario's key vault of there's no way that you can do copy with private key with a key vault key unless key vault writes a encrypt provider, which they've yet to do. And so then you have to give us the cert and key as separate objects. And then the this has private key was just, did you give us the cert and key as separate objects? But yeah, we can totally cut it until we have a scenario that better clarifies why we need to expose the data. Basically, we just previously overexposed.
Well, like I think it would be fine to obsolete the old one though. Because, like, what does it mean?
I would like to, but I don't know if people use it.
Well, like, so what if they
I don't
use
think anyone uses it.
That's not gonna be future-proof, right?
I mean, we can obsolete it and say not all supported keys derive from asymmetric algorithm. Like, the problem with obsoleting is we have to give a message.
well, if you're obsoleting it, you probably want to give them an alternative.
Like they know what they created CMS signer with, right?
Well, the person who consumes it might not be the person who created it. It might not be the component who created it.
When would it not be?
I mean, the framework's just a bunch of building blocks, right? Like, maybe someone's using CMS signer as an exchange type for some weird reason. I agree it would be unlikely.
I don't see any falsehood internally, so. But from
I-
other APIs.
I wouldn't obsolete it yet. If you get a bunch of feedback from people saying, "Hey, we really need access
Well,
to the object that's passed into the constructor,"
Let's at least make sure we updated the docs and probably good.
yeah,
Yeah.
update the doc certainly.
Yeah.
But if you get a bunch of feedback from people saying like, "Hey, we really need access to this," then maybe at that point, that's when we do the whole, "Okay, fine, we'll obsolete the old one and add the new property."
Mhm. Yep.
Like, don't break into jail, I guess.
Sure.
But it sounds like the consensus is remove has private key for now.
Okay.
Like, what is the verifier API?
Oh, designer info. That one doesn't have an explicit verify with any key because
Because
the
it's
cert-
cert based.
yeah, you,
Oh, it's always set based.
Yeah.
I see.
And that's it, right? The CMS signer was the last part of the issue proposal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then when MLDSA is ready, it'll be substantially similar.
Cool.
yeah, that has cozy too, but this one doesn't have it.
All right, no idea why that is super laggy. All right, so we removed CMS signer has private key.
A solid API design.
I think Jeremy had most of it down already.
You can take the credit.
I was gonna say definitely a team effort. This is not what the draft started with. So, all right, and since we only have 5 minutes left in scheduled time, and most, if not all of us, I guess just most of us, have a 12 o'clock meeting, I think we'll call it there.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and yes, you got to enjoy seeing people in a room, which mostly is because all the people in that room have the same 12 o'clock meeting. And we'll see you next week, same .NET time, same .NET channel. And I'm in the office today and didn't bring a gavel, so that's as close as I can get. And
You have really good noise canceling microphone.
oh, and I actually don't have a camera going out to YouTube right now because I don't have the multiplexer set up on this device, so they didn't even get to see me clap. And,
Oh, you're right. I'm looking at the stream right now, Sam.
yeah. And yeah, for the final question of should we add a default private key equal null, no, if the private key instance is not being supplied, then you would just call the existing constructor that takes just a certificate. So it's already covered. It's just, this is only showing what APIs we're adding, so it's not all visible there. All right. Any other questions or comments people have on this one, you can certainly write them on the issue.